My name is Kevin Berger, and I am the author of Atheism is Untenable. On this channel, I don't engage in apologetics. Instead, I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. This is Justified Nonetheless. Please like, share, subscribe, and turn on those notifications.
Hello again, my precious little tumbleweeds. In my video on the Ferrer hypothesis, I realized after updating it that it probably would have benefited from an elaboration on the root of Jesse aspect of the Nazareth detail in the Nativity story. And so this video will serve as a supplement for that video. To further explain the whole Nazareth plot line, if I can use that term, the mythicist perspective is a significant problem. There are two main components to this element of the Nativity narrative, one being arguably more problematic than the other. The first is that Matthew 2:23 specifically and explicitly connects Jesus' residence to the city of Nazareth, which necessitates the fabricated census as an explanation to get him from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And Jesus must be born in Bethlehem. According to Micah 5:2, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." This is tied to Matthew 2:4-6, which reads, "When he, Herod, had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them from where the Messiah was to be born. 'In Bethlehem, in Judea,' they replied, 'for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" If the intent was to, as suggested by mythicists, scour the Old Testament and develop Parashim to link this allegedly fictitious person to the existing text, whether it be by reinterpreting the text as prophetic when they were not prophetic or not, the authors could have stopped there. Step 1, reinterpret Micah 5:2 as prophecy. Step 2, develop Parashim accordingly. Step 3, write Matthew 2:4-6, linking the fictitious Jesus to Micah 5:2 through the birth in Bethlehem. Step 4, prophet. That's it. Yet Matthew 2:23 states, "And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene." The first issue with this additional detail is it is absolutely unnecessary, as the earlier verse already explicitly links Jesus to Micah 5:2, whether it was genuinely prophetic or not, or even genuinely believed to be prophetic or not, through the birth in Bethlehem. This additional detail serves no purpose for a purely fictitious person. The second issue here is that no such prophecy exists, which leads us to the second, more problematic component, where mythicists propose that the gospel writers were constructing a narrative based on symbolic wordplay rather than adhering to a specific prophecy found in the Hebrew scriptures. The idea that the Nazareth detail in the Gospels may have been derived from the root of Jesse is a concept where some mythicists, those who argue that Jesus may not have been a historical figure, propose to explain the origins of the Jesus narrative. This is what godless engineer latches onto in his attempted defense of his view. This interpretation connects the Nazareth detail in the Gospels to the prophecy of the Messiah found in the Old Testament, specifically in Isaiah 11:1, which speaks of the coming Messiah as a shoot or branch from the root of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David, and the root of Jesse is often interpreted as a symbol of the Messiah's Davidic lineage. Here's how the argument typically unfolds. 1. Isaiah 11:1 speaks of a shoot or branch that will come from the root of Jesse, which is often understood as a messianic prophecy, indicating that the Messiah would come from the line of David. 2. Nazareth in the New Testament is the town from which Jesus is identified as coming. Some mythicists and critics of the historicity of the gospel narratives suggest that the name Nazareth may have been a play on words connected to the messianic prophecy, specifically the idea of the branch or shoot from the root of Jesse. 3. The wordplay theory suggests that the gospel written, particularly those Matthew and Luke, may have taken the prophecy of the branch of Jesse and created the town of Nazareth by associating the Hebrew word netzer, which means branch. The name Nazareth could therefore be seen as a symbolic or literary reference to the Messiah's Davidic descent and fulfillment of prophecy rather than a literal geographic location. There are significant criticisms and challenges to that hypothesis. 1. The historical versus symbolic interpretations. Many scholars and historians argue that while the theory about the wordplay involving Nazareth and Netzer might be plausible from a linguistic perspective, it remains speculative. There's no direct historical or archaeological evidence that links the name Nazareth to the prophecy in Isaiah. Furthermore, the identification of Jesus with Nazareth in the Gospels might have been an established tradition by the time the Gospel writers were composing their texts, unrelated to any wordplay based on prophecy. 2. The problem of Nazareth's existence. Some mythicists argue that Nazareth was not a well-known town at the time of Jesus, and thus mention it in the Gospels could be later literary construction. Archaeological evidence suggests that Nazareth was a small, insignificant village during the time of Jesus, which further complicates the argument about its historical significance. This leads some to suggest that the Gospel writers might have fabricated or adapted details of Jesus' life to align with prophetic expectations. A. First century dwellings. Archaeologists have uncovered structures consistent with those houses from the 1st century CE, confirming that people lived in Nazareth around the time traditionally associated with Jesus' life. B. Tombs and burial sites. Various tombs dating to the 1st century have been discovered in the area, which provides further evidence of a settled population. C. Agricultural tools and facilities. Findings such as olive presses and cisterns support that Nazareth was a small agricultural community. D. Synagogue evidence. Although there is limited evidence of a synagogue from the time of Jesus, later ruins indicate that Nazareth continued as a Jewish community and had religious structures. This suggests a continuity of the site as a settlement with religious practices, supporting its identification as a Jewish village. E. Other historical mentions. In addition to these discoveries, early Christian sources like 4th century pilgrims of Bordeaux, reinforced by Eusebius in his Onomasticon, also identify Nazareth as a real location connected to the early Christian movement of Jesus' life. These archaeological findings counterclaims that Nazareth was also a purely fictional or invented location. While it was a small and seemingly insignificant village, evidence strongly supports that Nazareth existed in the 1st century and could have been the hometown of Jesus as described in the Gospels. 3. Messianic prophecies and Jesus' lineage. While the Gospel writers are careful to trace Jesus' lineage through David, specifically in Matthew's genealogy, the connection between the root of Jesse prophecy and the name of Nazareth is far from universally accepted. There is a wide range of interpretations regarding how the fulfillment of prophecy is understood in the Gospels, and some scholars see the claim that Jesus of Nazareth fulfills the prophecy as more of a matter of theological construction than historical fact. 4. The criterion of unnecessary variation. This is another serious obstacle. Micah 5:2 specifically and explicitly states that the Messiah is to be born in the city of Bethlehem. Matthew 2:4-6 specifically and explicitly makes that connection without any ambiguity. Whether the passage from Micah was genuinely prophetic or not, whether Jesus was an actual person or not, or whether this person was actually born in Bethlehem or not. If the intent were to fabricate a non-existent mythical person, historicize that person, and for it to be believed, the writers had no need to go any further. Therefore, the argument from the mythicist perspective must be that despite this, the writers unnecessarily added the "so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets that he would be called a Nazarene" passage, and then also make a tenuous argument that this was a play on the Hebrew word netzer to make it fit the Isaiah 11:1 passage, to effectively force a square peg into a round hole, despite the fact that the wordplay idea is entirely speculative and doesn't have any concrete evidence to support it. The contradictory archaeological evidence of an actual historical town of Nazareth and the connection to 11:1 isn't universally accepted in academia. In summary, the suggestion that the Nazareth detail in the Gospel was derived from the root of Jesse or the branch of Isaiah 11:1 is a creative hypothesis posited by some mythicists to explain the origin of the name Nazareth in the context of Jesus' messianic identity. And while it's an intriguing hypothesis, it remains speculative and relies heavily on linguistic parallels which do not provide direct historical evidence. And what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Further, as discussed before, the fact that A is analogous to B does not imply that A is equal to B. Further yet, this hypothesis creates unnecessary variation and contradiction within the narrative that cannot be reconciled, or even explained for that matter, through the attribution of theological motivation. In fact, this unnecessary and contradictory detail only serves to undermine the credibility of the writers because the narrative is actually stronger without it. Finally, this attribution to theological or other motivations is ultimately an appeal to motivation fallacy, born of question begging, and it too is unsupported by actual evidence. For these reasons and others, the Ferrer hypothesis, and make no mistake, it is a hypothesis, not an established objective fact, cannot be considered to be the inference to the best explanation. The best explanation is in fact a Q source, most likely an oral tradition that was later codified in written form. Until next time, remember, even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, they may be justified nonetheless.